Today we're going to be analyzing a hand I played from day one of the main event. We're going to be analyzing some of the decisions I made in PIO Solver with some node locking. Before we get started, I want to say that I'm not a PIO expert, and I'm making these videos as a way to help me feel more productive while I'm studying off the tables. There's definitely a chance there are mistakes in my analysis, and I'm open to constructive feedback. I'm planning on pumping out more of these videos to hopefully motivate myself to do more of this work and better understand the different PIO functionalities. Anyway, let's get to the hand. We are at big blind 500 on day one of the main event, and we are about 50,000 deep with a regular sitting to our direct right. I've been talking with him for the last few hours, and I get the sense he used to play online tournaments full-time, and now he plays part-time while he manages a different business. In general, I think he's probably one of the stronger regs in the field from what I've seen from the last few hours, but I don't think he's an elite-level player. There is a recreational that limps from mid undergun +1, and then our regular makes it 2,000 from mid position. We are in the hijack with aces. We make it 6,500, and then it folds back to the regular who calls. The flop comes Jack93 rainbow. The regular checks. We bet 1/3 pot, 5,000 to 15,000, and he calls. The turn comes the 10 of spades. Our villain elects to lead 15,000 into about 25,000, and we elect to call. On the 3 of spades river, he goes all in for our last 28,500, and we elect to fold. So as far as what I was thinking during the hand, I think the turn is a pretty uncomfortable spot. I felt like I could go either way in the moment, but I ended up deciding to call, and then I felt like the river was a pretty easy fold. But after talking about the hand more with some friends, I'm starting to feel like the turn, it could actually be a pretty easy fold depending on assumptions you make about the villain's range. So I figured I would run it in PIO with some node locking and see what the solver decides that we should do. So this is what I've entered for our 3-betting range here. I think we're going to be 3-betting generally pretty linearly at the stack depth, but we've added in some hands like ace-5 suited, ace-4 suited, those suited wheel aces, and given this is level 1 of the main event with some weaker players behind us, I've given us some suited connectors at 50% frequency. I think this is pretty fair. We're going to be 3-betting these hands sometimes, and we're going to be calling with these hands sometimes. But I think this is a pretty straightforward 3-betting range to assign us for this simulation. This is the range that we're assigning the villain in this hand for isolating the limp and then calling the 3-bet. We're going to assume that he 4-bets aces, kings, queens, and ace-king 100% of the time. You could make arguments that he's going to flat queens sometimes, but for this simulation, we're just going to assume he 4-bets all of those hands. We've given him ace-queen at 50% frequency because I think sometimes this player might 4-bet this hand. Same thing with king-queen off, and then we've given him a wide variety of suited connectors and pairs and some suited aces that I think he's going to be calling with close to 100% of the time, so that's how we've entered his range here. As far as the bet sizes, we have given the in-position player, which is the hero in this hand, a 35% flop bet size, and then we're giving the 33 or 70% sizes for the turn and the river, although we're not going to explore those in this simulation, and then we're giving the out-of-position player the donk size of 70% on the turn and river, which is relatively close to the sizing that he used in the hand. So we're going to start with the first decision here, which is the out-of-position player's decision to check or bet this flop. Now on Jack93 rainbow, the in-position player, which is the 3-better, is going to have jacks and nines at the same frequency for the most part as the out-of-position player, and the in-position player will retain overpairs that the out-of-position player cannot have. So given that there is no equity advantage and there is no nut advantage for the out-of-position player, it makes sense that they will be checking this flop almost 100% of the time. I think if I had run the simulation longer, it would probably be close to 100%. PIO is betting 97%, almost 98%, but I think the 2% is statistical noise. So our out-of-position player is going to check. Our in-position player, this is also unsurprising, is going to use this 1/3 sizing 80% of the time. It's going to occasionally check some of its lowest equity hands like ace-5 suited or 8-6 suited, but for the most part it's betting most of its hands to this sizing. Now, on the 10 of spades, you might assume that the 10 of spades actually helps the 3-bet caller, the out-of-position player here, because it brings in some straights and some two pairs. But an important thing to take into account is that the in-position player is going to have king, queen, 10-10, jack-jack, and 9-9 at very similar frequencies. So this is not actually a turn card that helps the out-of-position player. When I was playing this in the hand in the moment, I was thinking that maybe this is a turn card that the out-of-position player can actually develop a lead range on. But in reality, if we go to our run-out hotness here and we look at the equities, we can see that for the in-position player, the best cards are an ace or a king. That should be pretty obvious. And the worst cards are a 7 and an 8. But the 10 is actually positive for the in-position player. And if you look at the in-position EV, we can see that the only real dicey turn cards are 7, 8s, or 9s. The 10 is pretty strong, and the 10 is even better than a queen or a jack for the equity for the in-position player. And then for the out-of-position player, we can see that the only strong turn cards here are a 7, 8, or a 9. And that makes sense because they're going to have more of those smaller sort of mid pairs that the in-position player may not have. So with this being said, this is not a turn card that the out-of-position player can lead according to PIO. Even though PIO is not leading this turn as the out-of-position player, because I did not run the simulation for hours, I think we can still see the remnants of how it tried to construct a turn lead range with the 2.5% frequency we have here. So if we start to look at this range, we can then think about how we're going to node lock for the future. So PIO is leading this turn as the out-of-position player at a very small frequency, using all of its value hands, all of its set straights, two pairs, and then using hands like king 10 suited, 9-7 suited, 10-9, oh that's two pair, 9-8 suited, basically pair and gutters, pair and open-enders, things of that nature as bluffs. Now, as far as how the in-position player is going to respond to this bet sizing in an equilibrium, we can see that PIO is electing to obviously continue with all of its two pairs, sets, straights, calling with queens and kings, which have straight draws in addition to having overpairs. And if we look at aces, we can see that aces, if you look at the bottom right, you can see the EV. Calling with aces is basically break even in an equilibrium here. And that's probably because, as compared to a hand like kings, aces did not block straights. So kings, the EV of calling with kings, the EV of calling this, I believe it's about 15,000 chip turn bet, is about 8,000, which is a lot. Whereas if we look at aces, the EV of calling is between negative 90 chips and positive 300 chips, depending on the suits that we have. So in an equilibrium, PIO is calling sometimes with aces on this turn and folding sometimes with aces on this turn. But that being said, I don't think the villain in this hand was going to lead with a range that looks like this. I don't think the villain in this hand is, I don't want to say good enough, but I don't think he is, I guess I will say good enough. I don't think he's good enough to balance a leading range here. Because being able to balance a leading range here and have the right amount of bluffs and include hands like 9-7 suited, 9-8 suited, it's really difficult, and I didn't think he was capable of this. So next we're going to see what happens if we node lock his turn range to be more value heavy. So this is how I have node locked villain's turn range. So instead of betting this turn 2.5% of the time, we're going to assume that villain bets it 30% of the time and uses all of their value hands, king, queen off, king, queen suited, jacks, 10s, 9s, 10-9 suited, 7-8 suited, etc. But then we've given them three combos of bluffs, queen, jack suited, queen 10 suited, and king 10 suited. I think it's reasonable that villain would use a range that looks something like this. So versus this unbalanced turn lead range that is mostly value hands, which I think is reasonable in reality here, we can see that PIO, instead of folding 40% of the time, PIO is now folding 70% of the time. And if we look at the EV of aces, it's no longer break even. The EV of calling with aces is actually minus around 3,000 chips, as opposed to being roughly 0 in the equilibrium that we ran before. So versus this unbalanced turn lead, we can see that we're actually folding kings a lot of the time if we don't have the king of spades. So we're basically continuing with queens and then sets and straights. which might seem crazy because it's, we're continuing with 30% of our range. But I think this is an example of a spot where if you can identify that villain probably is under bluffing the turn, and they're probably just getting greedy with their value hands and deciding to have a lead range, not realizing that it's not a good turn card for them, we can actually overfold this turn. Now, as played, if we decide to call and we see the 3 of spades and villain elects to bet, we can see that we are basically calling the river with boats and straights only. And we're not calling with kings or queens ever, and we're basically just continuing with the nuts. So the takeaway for me from this hand was, if villain is leading a turn card that they're not supposed to lead, you have to ask yourself, are they over bluffing or are they under bluffing? And I think it's more likely in this scenario that he was severely under bluffing, and that villain thought, this is a good turn card for me. I'll have some straights, I'll have some 2 pairs. Not realizing that we can have those hands too, and deciding to lead his value hands. Now, I don't want to be results oriented, but I did talk to this villain after the hand about the hand, and at the end of the day, when play had ended, he told us that he had Jack-Jack, and that he thought this was a good turn card for him, so he figured he would be leading with, he said he would be leading with most of his range, but I am skeptical if he would be leading hands like 9-7 suited or Queen 10 suited. I think most people would play those as a check call on the turn, potentially a check raise, but I think if he is going to lead this turn, it is a reasonable assumption to assume that they're going to have mostly value, and then we should react accordingly. And in this case, although I called the turn, in reality, from the analysis I've just done, I can conclude that I think the turn is a pretty easy fold with aces.